My name is Harper Sloan. I'd spent 9 years solving problems nobody else even noticed. Then one morning, my director looked around the conference room and said, "Nobody here is irreplaceable, Harper included." Nobody defended me, so I didn't argue. I packed my desk, handed over my badge, and walked out without looking back. 6 months later, the same company called me 5 times in one day, not to apologize, to ask one question. "Harper, what would it take to bring you back?" My name is Harper Sloan. For 9 years, I worked at North Axis Logistics, a growing healthcare logistics company. I wasn't the loudest person in the office. I wasn't the one giving presentations. I wasn't the one collecting awards. I was simply the person everyone called when something went wrong. Servers crashed? They called me. Clients were angry? They called me. Deadlines were impossible? They called me. I honestly believed loyalty still mattered. I was about to learn how wrong I was. Most people in the office thought our department ran smoothly because of good management. It didn't. Behind the scenes, I maintained dozens of workflow automations that kept shipments moving, client reports accurate, and compliance deadlines on track. Nobody asked me to stay late. They simply expected me to. Whenever someone thanked the department, my name somehow disappeared. I told myself it didn't matter, as long as the work was getting done. I wish I'd stopped believing that sooner. Everything changed during a Monday leadership meeting. Every manager was there. Several junior employees were sitting along the wall, taking notes. Director Declan Mercer stood at the front of the room discussing staffing changes. Then someone asked whether losing experienced employees would hurt the department. Declan smiled. Without even looking at me, he said, "Let's be honest. Nobody here is irreplaceable." He paused, then added, "Harper included." The room went completely quiet. For a few seconds, I honestly expected someone to speak up. Maybe Brandon, maybe HR, maybe one of the managers I'd helped for years. Nobody did. Some people looked uncomfortable, others stared down at their laptops. One junior analyst nervously looked at me before quickly looking away. Declan simply continued the meeting as if he'd commented on the weather. That silence hurt more than his words, because silence is agreement when nobody challenges it. An hour after the meeting, HR emailed me. My promotion request had been denied. Again. The reason was painfully generic. Leadership has decided to move in another direction. I stared at the screen. 9 years. Outstanding reviews. Countless weekends. Hundreds of overtime hours. Apparently, none of it outweighed office politics. I quietly closed my laptop. Something inside me had started changing. The following morning, my new manager, Brandon Keene, stopped by my desk. "We're bringing in someone new. I'd like you to spend this week cross-training her." A few minutes later, a young woman walked over. She smiled politely. "I'm Zoe. Nice to meet you." None of this was her fault. She seemed eager to learn. But then Brandon casually added, "She'll eventually be taking over most of your responsibilities." He said it like he was announcing the weather. Nobody even pretended to hide it anymore. By Wednesday, another surprise arrived. My administrative access had already been reduced. Several system permissions disappeared. When I asked IT if something was wrong, they apologized. We received instructions from leadership. That afternoon, Declan stopped by my desk. "I need complete documentation by Friday. Everything. 9 years of knowledge, hundreds of customized workflows, thousands of tiny decisions. He wanted all of it summarized, in 1 week. I almost laughed. Instead, I simply nodded. That evening, I stayed late, not to finish documentation, to finally calculate something. I opened my sent emails. Over the last 3 years, I'd requested documentation time 11 different times. Every request had been denied. Too busy. Maybe next quarter. We'll revisit it later. Now they expected perfect documentation overnight. The problem had never been me, it had been leadership. The next morning, I walked into HR carrying one envelope. Inside was my resignation. 2 weeks' notice. Professional, respectful, no emotional speech, no accusations. Monica from HR looked surprised. Are you sure? I smiled politely. Very. When Declan heard the news, he walked past my desk and shrugged. Good luck out there. You'll realize pretty quickly that companies don't stop because one person leaves. I simply smiled. Maybe he was right. Or maybe he was about to find out what I actually did every day. On my final afternoon, I cleaned my desk. Family photo, coffee mug, notebook. That's all I took. Several coworkers quietly stopped by to hug me. One whispered, I don't think they understand what you actually do. I smiled. They're about to. At exactly 5 o'clock, I handed my badge to security, walked through the front doors, and never looked back. I didn't know it then. But 6 months later, that same building would be calling me in desperation. My first week away felt strange, for the first time in years. I wasn't checking emails before breakfast, no emergency calls, no late-night messages. I almost felt guilty. Then I reminded myself, peace shouldn't feel unfamiliar. A former coworker texted me. Things are getting messy. The monthly reports didn't match. One vendor payment had been missed. Nobody knew why. I did. Those were the errors I quietly fixed every month before anyone noticed. Now, they finally noticed. A few days later, Zoe called me. She sounded nervous. I hope you don't mind me asking. Did I do something wrong? I smiled. No. You were put into an impossible position. She sighed. They expected me to know everything. I felt sorry for her. She wasn't replacing me. She was replacing 9 years of experience. Meanwhile, Declan acted like nothing had changed. One coworker told me he'd laughed during a meeting. Harper made everything look harder than it really was. That sentence didn't upset me. It made me curious. Because reality has a way of correcting arrogance. A week later, I accepted a remote consulting position. Better salary. Flexible hours. No weekend emergencies. Most importantly, people actually listened when I spoke. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was enjoying my work. During an online meeting, one of my new clients smiled. I know you. We'd worked together years earlier. He laughed. I wondered why service suddenly changed. I simply smiled. I changed companies. He nodded. That explains everything. By the second month, more issues appeared. A shipment was delayed. A compliance deadline was missed. Customer complaints doubled. Leadership blamed the software, then the vendors, then the staff. Nobody blamed the real problem: poor planning. One afternoon, I heard something interesting. North Axis was preparing for a major compliance audit. I knew exactly what that meant. The backup records, historical files, workflow logs. Almost all of them had been maintained by me. Suddenly, their confidence didn't seem so convincing anymore. Then my phone rang. It was Ethan Brooks, one of my former clients. I've been asking for you. I politely explained I'd moved on. He sighed. I figured. Things haven't been the same. That conversation told me everything I needed to know. 3 months after I resigned, my phone lit up with an unknown number. Voicemail, then another call, then another. Finally, I checked the message. Hi, Harper. This is Monica from HR. We just have a quick question. I smiled and put my phone back down. Some questions are worth charging for. The next morning, my phone rang again. Same number, same voicemail. This time, Monica sounded less confident. Harper? When you have a moment, could you please call us back? I smiled. If they only needed a quick answer, they wouldn't keep calling. So I let the voicemail sit. That afternoon, my phone lit up again. This time, the caller ID surprised me. Declan Mercer. I answered, but I didn't say anything. He cleared his throat. Harper. I just have a couple of questions. I calmly replied. I'm no longer an employee. There was a long pause. Then he awkwardly said, "I know." That was the closest thing to humility I'd ever heard from him. Declan finally asked, "Can you tell us where you kept the audit backup files?" I almost laughed. For 9 years, I'd begged leadership to let me document those files properly. Now they wanted me to explain everything. For free. I answered politely, "I'm sorry. Any consulting requests need to go through a contract." Then I wished him a good afternoon and ended the call. A former coworker texted me later that evening. "The auditors are here." Apparently, they were already asking for historical compliance records. Nobody could find the correct folders. The backup spreadsheets had been renamed. Reference files were missing. People were running from office to office looking for answers. I wasn't happy they were struggling. I was disappointed they'd ignored years of warnings. The next day, another former client reached out. "I've got a meeting with North Axis tomorrow." Then he quietly added, "I requested you." I smiled. "I don't work there anymore." He sighed. "I know. I was hoping they'd bring you back." For the first time, I realized the problem wasn't just inside the company. Clients were noticing too. That Friday, my phone rang again. This time it was Daniel Cross, the vice president. His tone was completely different. Professional. Respectful. "Harper, I understand you've received several calls. I'd like to apologize if they've put you in an uncomfortable position." That was the first apology I'd heard since leaving. Then he asked, "Would you at least consider having a conversation?" I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I simply said, "Send me the details." Monday morning, Monica emailed me. The offer looked almost insulting. My old position, same department, same reporting structure, a small salary increase, no mention of Declan's behavior, no apology. Just, "We'd love to have you back." I closed the email after 30 seconds. Some opportunities aren't opportunities. They're repeat mistakes. I replied with one sentence, "Thank you, but I respectfully decline." 5 minutes later, Monica called. "Can I ask why?" I answered honestly, "Because nothing important changed. The title is the same. The leadership is the same. The culture is the same. I didn't leave because of the paycheck." Silence. Then she quietly said, "I understand." I wasn't sure she actually did. 2 days later, one of my former teammates called. "You won't believe what happened." One of North Axis's biggest healthcare clients had paused contract renewal. The client specifically mentioned declining service after my departure. Meanwhile, the auditors had expanded their review. The company wasn't just embarrassed anymore. Now, they were losing money. That evening, Daniel Cross emailed me directly. The subject line read, "Consulting Proposal." This email felt different. No generic HR language. No empty compliments. Just one sentence that caught my attention. "Harper, we'd like you to name the conditions under which you'd consider helping us." I leaned back in my chair. 6 months earlier, Declan had called me easily replaceable. Now, his company was asking me to decide my own price. Everything had finally changed. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened a blank document. If North Axis wanted my help, they were going to do it on my terms, not theirs. I spent an hour writing exactly what I needed. No emotion, no revenge, just professional boundaries. For the first time in years, I wasn't asking permission. I was setting conditions. 2 days later, I joined a video call. On the screen were Monica from HR, Vice President Daniel Cross, and 2 legal representatives. One face was missing. Declan. Daniel noticed. We thought this conversation would be more productive without him. That told me everything. Leadership finally understood where the real problem had been. Daniel didn't waste time. The audit uncovered major documentation gaps. I quietly nodded. "I warned the company." He sighed. "We found your emails. Every single request I'd sent over the past 3 years had been archived. Requests for documentation time, requests for backup reviews, requests for additional staffing, all ignored. The silence on the call said more than any apology could. Then Daniel surprised me. He asked if someone else could join the meeting. A moment later, Zoe appeared on the screen. She looked exhausted. "I'm sorry, Harper. They told me I'd be replacing one position. I didn't realize I was replacing an entire department." She wasn't making excuses. She was telling the truth. I smiled gently. "This was never your fault." For the first time, she looked relieved. Daniel shared several numbers. 3 major clients had delayed renewals. Compliance deadlines had been missed. Overtime costs had doubled. Managers were spending hours fixing problems that used to disappear before anyone noticed. Then he quietly admitted, "We underestimated how much institutional knowledge you carried." No, they hadn't underestimated it. They'd ignored it. "Finally," Daniel asked, "what would it take for you to help us?" I slid my proposal across the screen. Double my previous annual rate. 6-month consulting contract. Payment for the first 60 days upfront. Remote work only. Every request submitted through the Vice President's office. No direct communication with Declan. Complete authority over rebuilding documentation. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Monica looked at Daniel. He slowly smiled. "I think those terms are fair." I honestly hadn't expected him to agree that quickly. If you've ever had to know your own value before anyone else did, comment "Know your worth." "There is one more condition," I said. Everyone looked back at me. "I want Zoe assigned to work with me." Daniel looked surprised. "Really?" I nodded. "She deserves proper training." She wasn't the problem. She was handed an impossible job. Zoe covered her mouth. Thank you. Sometimes revenge isn't hurting innocent people. It's refusing to become the person who hurt you. The following afternoon, one of my former coworkers texted me. "Declan just found out." Apparently, he'd argued against every one of my contract terms, especially the part where he couldn't contact me directly. Daniel rejected every objection. For the first time in years, Declan wasn't making the decisions. He was answering for them. That must have been difficult for someone who believed everyone else was replaceable. My first day back wasn't as an employee. It was as an outside consultant. Security didn't hand me an employee badge. They gave me a visitor credential. It felt strangely satisfying. People who had barely noticed me before suddenly stood up to shake my hand. Not because I'd changed, because their perspective had. The work hadn't become more valuable. They had finally noticed it. Halfway through my first week, Daniel called me into a private meeting. "The board has opened an internal leadership review." I didn't ask why. I already knew. He quietly added, "Your emails became part of the investigation. The ignored warnings, the denied documentation requests, the promotion records. Everything was finally being examined." 6 months earlier, I'd walked out carrying one small box. Now, the people who ignored me were the ones being asked difficult questions. The legal paperwork arrived the next morning. I read every page carefully. 6-month consulting agreement, double my previous salary, remote work, upfront payment. Every request routed through Vice President Daniel Cross. No direct communication with Declan Mercer. I signed it. Not because I missed the company, because professionals deserve to be paid for professional work. This time, my knowledge finally had a price. I immediately began rebuilding the audit system. Every morning, I joined video meetings. Every afternoon, I organized documentation. Every evening, I trained Zoe. Old workflow maps, compliance records, vendor history, backup procedures. 19 days later, the audit team requested its final review. For the first time in months, everything balanced. The missing records had been restored. The documentation was finally complete. The crisis was over. After our final training session, Zoe asked if we could talk privately. She looked embarrassed. "I need to tell you something." I nodded. She took a deep breath. When they hired me, Declan told me your job wasn't that difficult. He said you'd made yourself look more important than you really were. She looked down. I believed him. Then she smiled sadly. I don't anymore. I wasn't angry. She'd learned the truth the hard way. Just like everyone else. A week later, Daniel called. The leadership review is complete. I quietly waited. Then he said, Declan has been removed from the audit project. I wasn't surprised, but Daniel wasn't finished. The board also decided he'll no longer serve as department director. Months of ignored warnings, dismissive comments, and poor leadership had finally caught up with him. I didn't celebrate. Consequences don't need applause. Near the end of my contract, Daniel invited me to headquarters. For the first time in months, I walked through the same front doors I'd once left carrying a cardboard box. Only this time, people greeted me differently. Managers thanked me, coworkers smiled. Even security remembered my name. Nothing about me had changed. Only the way they valued my work. That realization was strangely satisfying. As I walked toward the elevator, someone quietly said, Harper. I turned around. It was Declan. He looked nothing like the confident director from 6 months earlier. He hesitated before speaking. I should have listened. I looked at him for a moment, then simply replied, It wasn't my job to convince you. It was yours to lead. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, and the conversation ended there. Before leaving headquarters, I stopped by Zoe's desk. She smiled. I finally understand the system. I laughed. No. You understand the responsibility. She nodded. I'll never treat someone the way they treated you. That sentence meant more than any apology I'd received. Maybe the best legacy wasn't fixing broken systems. Maybe it was helping someone refuse to repeat the same mistakes. A month after the audit ended, Daniel called again. We'd like to keep you permanently. This time, you'll report directly to me. The salary was excellent. The position was respected. Everything I'd once wanted. I smiled. Then politely declined. Some chapters aren't meant to be reopened. I'd already built a better life somewhere else. One evening, I opened the small box I'd carried out of the office on my last day. Inside was my old employee badge, a coffee mug, a notebook filled with ideas leadership had never read. I smiled. Those weren't reminders of failure. They were proof I'd walked away before forgetting my own worth. Sometimes leaving is the bravest promotion you'll ever give yourself. People still ask whether I regret resigning. Not for a second. Leaving that company gave me something no promotion ever could. Peace. Respect. Control over my own career. The funniest part? Declan was right about one thing. I was replaceable. The company eventually filled my position. What they couldn't replace was 9 years of experience, earned trust, and the quiet work that kept everything running while nobody was paying attention. 6 months after calling me easily replaceable, they asked me to name my price. I did. And for the first time in my career, they finally understood my value.